want to go ahead and thank everybody for joining us today in our new format. So we're moving to Zoom from here on out for the webinar. Thanks to Jimmy. He did an awesome job putting this thing together, and I think we're going to like this a whole lot better. Today we got somebody very special. It's Maddie Moore. Maddie Wood rather. I've had the pleasure. Yeah, this is another one of my kids. But I had the pleasure of working with her with ODP and watched her run sessions. An incredible person, an incredible coach, and I'm really excited about today and what she has to offer. I know she's worked really hard on it and put a lot of effort into it, and I know you guys will enjoy it as much as I do. And with that being said, Maddie, it's all yours.
Thanks, Warren. I appreciate it. Let me go ahead and share. All right. So like you said, my name is Madeline Wood. I'm here to talk about head coach and assistant roles and kind of, those relationships and what those roles are and how you kind of define those. So one thing that's kind of special about me giving this presentation, I guess I could say, is that I've only been an assistant coach up until now. I have been an assistant coach the last several years, and I just now accepted my first head coach role. So this is me kind of transitioning into that head coach role and kind of how I plan out things and how we'll run things. And just so you guys kind of know, this presentation, I did participate in a webinar with Dean Austin. And so that's kind of where some of this information is coming from. And then the other is just kind of based on my experiences that I've had as an assistant coach in the past. And so kind of like the things that I saw, whether it was a good experience or a bad experience, and kind of like what I learned from that. And so I took those good experiences with me to kind of promote those when I was a head coach, and then kind of learn from those bad experiences I had. So this is kind of a pile of all of that all together. So hopefully you guys all learned something and kind of enjoy what I have for you guys today. So here's my game plan. I'm going to be covering building coaching staff rapport first. Okay, that's going to be the first thing we kind of talk about. Second will be your communication with your staff. The third thing will be defining and deciding on staff roles and responsibilities. For that third topic, I realize that most people kind of already have a plan, but I kind of want to give you one that Dean Austin talked about and kind of stressing some aspects of that. So you may already have one, but I'll just kind of let you know what that looks like when we get there. The fourth thing is creating and sharing a monthly plan. This is something that I've been working on for a while now. That being said, when you look at it, I'll give everyone access to look at it. It's not done yet. It is a work in progress document. So you may see some things that you notice that are just left out of it, but that you might have in your program right now, and I just haven't maybe penciled that in yet. So just kind of know it's a work in progress document, but I will share that with you even though it is work in progress. So, I did not do it. Okay, there we go. All right, so building coaching staff rapport. I love this Oprah Winfrey quote. It said, great communication begins with connection. Okay, you have to have a connection with all of your coaches in order to have that good rapport where you can rely on one another, trust one another, and truly communicate to the level that you want to be. So just know that it all starts with this connection. So that's what we're gonna focus on at the beginning. So when we talk about rapport, the next couple of slides are what my standards will be. This is what I will want to work up to. I hope that these are things that maybe you already have in your program or you're working up to those, but these are just kind of a list of different things that you would probably want to see in your program between your coaching staff. So you want to build rapport that allows coaches give and take between each other, and that it's acceptable to challenge one another. I truly believe that if you want to be successful, you want to have people asking questions about the things that are going on in your program. So you don't want to assume that you're always doing everything right. You want to encourage people to kind of have those conversations. Well, hey, why not this? Or, hey, what do you think about this? Because it'll only grow your program from there. You want to create a feeling of trust and loyalty. Guys, I truly feel like that's a big piece. You want your assistant coaches to trust you. You want to build that rapport with them so that they are loyal to you in every decision that they make. I feel like for me, that's something that's been interesting in my past because I haven't always trusted my head coaches, which wasn't always fun for me. But I feel like that's something that you have to have in order to really, really work together and build that loyalty, support each other in every single decision that you make. So that's kind of something that I feel like is pretty big as well. You want to promote those suggestions and feedback. I know that kind of goes along with that first bullet point of challenging one another, but you want to have those conversations where you feed off of one another, and at the end of the year, at the end of the season, you're willing to accept feedback and have those conversations about how the year went and stuff. So those are just kind of a couple of things as far as building rapport. You want to make sure that your coaching staff accepts mistakes. I mean, there's not a single person in this webinar right now that hasn't made a mistake in their coaching career, and all of your assistant coaches have made mistakes. So you want to make sure that you accept those mistakes and just make sure that people are learning from them. So whether that's you as a head coach or your assistant coaches. So just making sure that those mistakes are acceptable, okay? I'm not saying it's ideal. It's not something that you want, but just making sure that people learn from those. Coaches being self-aware, guys, you want them to know who they are. You want them to kind of realize the decisions they're making and why they're making those decisions, because you want those to contribute to your overall program, okay? You want to take their beliefs and use those to your advantage in your program. So make sure that you're all as a coaching staff being self-aware with kind of who you are and those kind of qualities that you want to have and stuff, or you do possess. The last thing on this one, it says encourage all the coaches to be on the same page and have common goals. I think that's something that kind of gets lost sometimes in the communication and that transition aspect. So making sure that you as a whole entire coaching staff are on that same page, okay? Whether that's planning a practice and what those 3 main focuses are going to be for that practice, or whether you are planning your goals for a particular game, and you want to make sure you have those common goals the whole year. So maybe that's your goals for just that 1 year, or the goals for the 3 upcoming years, your 5-year plan, whatever that looks like. You want to make sure that you're all on the same page and working towards the same target. The last set is you want to motivate all your coaches to do their job to the best of their ability. People work better with motivation and encouragement. So make sure that if that's not something you do frequently, that's something you start focusing on, because if you have a good assistant coach who's appreciated, they want to work to the best of their ability and they want those extra tasks. They want to grow. And so make sure that you build that rapport where you're motivating yourself, all of your assistant coaches do the best that they possibly can each and every day. Instill a sense of value and purpose. That goes along with the top one. If I as an assistant coach feel value and I know that I have a place in the program and I have a voice, then it's going to show in every aspect of the job that I do, whether that's as simple as a Twitter post, or communicating with my athletes, planning different sessions. That value and purpose completely moves in based on that motivation. So you want to instill that value and purpose in every single person in your coaching staff, whether it's the head coach yourself or all the way to that second assistant on JV. You've got to make sure that you instill that sense of value. The last thing I have on here is you want to drive all your coaches to develop and grow. I had a mentor in, I guess, the last 2 years that told me when I become a head coach that if I'm not growing my assistants to be head coaches, then I'm doing something wrong. You want to develop and continue to grow your coaches so that they can continue to develop and grow and help your program. I mean, that's the idea of it all. So those were just kind of 9 different things that you want to build that sense, that community within your coaches. So, and I will share this, Warren will share this presentation. I've already sent it to him. So just know that when I get, these are the short slides. I don't have very much, but here in a minute, there's going to be a lot more words. So just know that it will be shared. So don't worry about copying it all down or anything if that was something you were wanting to do. All right, so so now we've talked about what we want our ideal environment to look like. So now let's talk about how to actually create that. There's got to be a bunch of different things that you do. And when I put this presentation together, I knew that a lot of these things you guys would already be doing, okay? I realized that. But some of these things you might not be doing to the best of your ability, or you might not have considered them all the way. So some of this stuff may be a review, and some of it hopefully kind of makes you reflect on the way that you're doing things in your own program. So we have a couple of slides on this as well. So creating this ideal environment, head coaches must reflect constantly. You can reflect on your own, your assistant coaches can reflect on your own, but at some point you've got to reflect all together. That's got to be an absolute must. You've got to make sure that you're working together with all of those practice practice decisions, game decisions, anytime you're doing anything for culture with your program, you want to make sure they're included in those discussions. Any type of thing you're doing with your leadership activities, whether that's just going and volunteering on the weekends, with your leadership council, whatever that looks like in your program, you want to make sure that your assistant coaches are having a say in that. And they're in those moments of deliberation, because that is when that growth happens, and that's when you start to connect and all that stuff. So reflect constantly with your assistant coaches. Keep them in the loop on all that decision making. The next thing is really, really big. I've had a coach in the past who gave up as much time as possible for me, and it helped me grow so much. That being said, I also had the reverse, instance where I didn't feel like I was getting that time, and I really struggled with that. So make sure as a head coach that you're giving up your time. You've got to create those opportunities for your assistant coaches to discuss with you, collaborate with you. And I think with that, you have to focus on things that are soccer related, but also things that are not soccer related. Okay. If you're going to build that community with your coaches where you can lean on one another, it's that loyalty, that trust, you've got to have conversations that are also not soccer related. So just kind of realize that is part of it. All right. I'm not trying to say you have to become best friends with all of your assistant coaches, but be a friend to them. They want that, and they will appreciate that. So just as a couple of things, schedule weekly coach meetings. I absolutely loved my head coach that had a weekly meeting. The fact that it was on Monday morning was not my favorite thing, but you know what? I showed up every single week, and that was such an opportunity for us. Some weeks it was an hour, some weeks it was 20 minutes. It didn't matter, but that was a huge opportunity for us to kind of discuss the program and grow it and stuff like that. Something that I'll be doing is I'll host a back to school cookout, or I'm doing a dinner, but yeah, dinner cookout. Do that at the beginning of the school year. Just bring them in, have conversation, and kind of bring them into your home, have those good moments to kind of learn one another and have those good conversations. Especially if you have new assistant coaches coming in, they want to meet you, I promise, and they want to figure out what you're all about. So host those social events. Maybe you're someone who's into game nights, okay? Encourage them to come out a couple times. Whatever those social events are for you, try to make sure that you have them at those events, because it's only going to create that cohesiveness between all of you guys. So make sure that you're creating those opportunities for them. The end of season and end of off-season, end of season meetings. Sorry, that messed me up. So make sure that you're having those opportunities to reflect. I know that goes back to the previous thing, but make sure you're meeting with them after each off-season, whether that's in the fall or after your spring season. Make sure that you're having those opportunities. And then an end-of-year meeting. That's where you've got to sit down. You've got to give up your time. Decide what your plans are for that those summer sessions. Okay, are you encouraging those kids to get into strength and conditioning? Are you running your own thing? What are your goals for your summer skills sessions? What are your goals going into the fall? And start having those conversations early, and give them that time. They cannot, the biggest thing is they cannot contribute to your program if you are not giving them the time to contribute. So I put etc. and I put it in bold because I want you to know those are not the only opportunities. Okay, those are just a couple of quick examples I thought of. There are so many other opportunities. You could have lunch meetings together once a week. Whatever that looks like for you, create that time. If you're not doing that right now, fix that. It is a must, in my opinion. It is just an absolute must. I don't know why it's not clicking. Okay, there it goes. So a couple of other things, guys, encourage and praise. All right. Your people are naturally driven to be more productive and generally better employees with that acknowledgement. So whether they did something little or massive for your program, maybe they just set something up that you needed, or maybe they went and completely put something together for you. Whatever that small or large task looks like, make sure that you are saying thank you every single time. It goes such a long way. I think that that's something that people overlook too often, and I think that really changes dynamics between those leadership roles and that next tier, because you have to make sure you're appreciating everyone. Give them credit at parent meetings. If something happened that week that was awesome, tell your parents about it. Give your assistant coaches that moment to kind of be honored. They will appreciate it. Make sure you mention them at banquets. Okay, talk about what not only that the teams accomplished, but what did your assistant coaches accomplish? Because all of that is going to be really, really important. Any coach will work harder for you knowing that they have the support and encouragement and praise. That is just a given. So if that's something you're not good about, then try to find ways to constantly praise those coaches when they're doing things right. Just like in the classroom, if you got a kid acting a fool, you don't really want to bring all that attention to them, because then it's that kind of negative, I guess, reaction that they want. But whenever they're acting right, that's where you praise them. You give them those moments. So same idea, just kind of take that with your assistant coaches there. But frequent check-ins. This is kind of that. I know a lot of schools have kind of transitioned that SEL now. Same thing, guys. Check in on those coaches. Okay, if it is a first-year teacher, support them in any way that you can. If there's someone who's been doing this for a while, just ask them how they're doing. And the reality of that is that if you had things and conversations that might have been off limits before or might not have been willing to be tested, that opens up those doors for those tough conversations. Just by kind of it's all about building that rapport. Check in with your coaches. Another thing that Dean Austin talked about was make sure that your coaches enjoy their job and that they're happy. That goes with that reflection piece. Are your coaches enjoying their job? If not, why? Can you figure that out? Can you adjust things? Because the most successful program you will have is where your assistant coaches feel that praise, and then also they're happy, they're enjoying their job, they're there and they're enjoying it. I mean, same thing for your kids. You want your kids to be there enjoying it. You don't want them to be miserable. Same exact setup. So make sure you're checking in on them, that kind of SEL, show them that love there. So the next thing, and I think this is really important too, introduce your assistant coaches to others. Okay, help those assistant coaches network. All right. That can help you in several different ways. If they can get a mentor of some sort throughout that process, you're only building your own program by doing that. By giving them more people to reach out to will only help you out, all right? Because they will bring those ideas back into your program and have those good conversations because they now have other people to discuss with. The other thing is if your person is passionate and they talk to other soccer people who are just as passionate, it'll only raise that level. I know you're all soccer people, so when as a soccer coach, and this is something I love doing, I'm very passionate about it. I love talking to other people who are passionate about it, and your assistant coaches will appreciate the same thing. So whether that's at a conference, a clinic, anything like that, make sure that you are helping those assistant coaches network. Just introduce them. Maybe make it a goal. I'm going to introduce them to 3 to 5 people this weekend, or hey, I'm going to introduce them to 1 to 3 people today, whatever that looks like. Have a goal in mind and make sure that you're providing them those opportunities because they might not always do it for themselves. All right. One big thing, consistency. If you're going to create an ideal environment, you've got to be consistent in what you are doing. Whether that's with one issue I've had in the past is inconsistent decisions with players. So if we decided that this was I guess I'll say punishment. I don't know if that's the appropriate word to use anymore. But if we decided this punishment for this particular, let's say a kid was late to weight room, for example. Okay, well, if this kid was late to weight room and she was a senior, we might not have punished her, whereas someone else who is a freshman or sophomore, we're creating that punishment for them. And that's not okay. You've got to make sure that you're consistent in that so that your assistant coaches can be consistent in that too, because that is something that can be very, very frustrating for assistant coaches, is if you've set a standard but that you're not holding that standard to everyone, whether that's within your coaching staff or within the players on the team. You've got to make sure that all that stuff is consistent, the way you're handling those things. Another thing is routines. Okay, assistant coaches are very willing to adjust. I'm sure you've all seen it in the past, but you've got to make sure that those are small changes. You don't want to come through and completely wipe everything out and throw them off balance. Think about it. I'm lucky where some of my assistant coaches this next year will not be multi-sport coaches. Some of you guys have coaches that are only multi-sport coaches. So you have to think about that. how are those changes going to affect them, and when is the best time to implement those and stuff. So you just really have to consider all those things and make sure you're considering your assistant coaches in that. But yeah, got to keep those standards consistent for them to be successful, and those routines. I mean, try to keep them as consistent as possible for them. Just don't switch it up too often. Another huge thing, and I'm kind of building up towards the end for these big things. Another one for me is lead by example. Okay. There is nothing, and I'm saying this from experience, there is nothing more frustrating than having a head coach who doesn't want to lead by example. If you set standards, you have got to hold to those same standards. For example, if you tell your athletes they have to be there 15 minutes in advance, don't walk in 8 minutes late every single day, okay? You have to make sure that you are maintaining those same standards and you are leading by example in everything that you do. So if that's something that you struggle with, work on it, okay? Be willing to change. Make sure that everything that you do, you're leading by example, because your assistant coaches are learning from you. They are picking up those pieces from everything that you do. So if you want to build that good rapport, make sure that you're leading them to be the way you want them to be. So just think about that in the way that you do things. Another thing, open communication about future aspirations. Okay. And I mentioned it earlier, you've got to share those short-term and long-term goals with them in order to be successful. One thing I kind of want to mention, and this is an activity I actually do within my classroom, at the beginning of every year, every district I've ever been in focuses on learning targets. I don't know if you noticed, I kind of had those at the beginning, something I'm used to, but I always do a learning target activity where I give every kid in the classroom a marshmallow and I split them into 3 groups. And within those 3 groups, I tell the first group that they need to hit the target and they have 10 seconds. And that is my only instruction. And so I start my timer and they look at each other like crazy people because they have no clue what I'm talking about. And it's the first day of school. So maybe someone chunks their marshmallow, but 9 times out of 10, they just look at each other. Then the second step is I grab a trash can and I take that trash can and I tell them this is the target. This is what you're shooting for. And then I start my 10 seconds and I start shaking it like crazy. So at that point, yes, they know what the target is, but it's not attainable. Okay. So most of my kids don't make that marshmallow bucket, even if there are all-star basketball players. That's the reality of it. Then my third step I always do, and this is just a true example of kind of what this looks like. I set my target, my trash can, on the desk and I tell them to make it. And I leave it there. There's no moving target. It is there. They know what it is. And every single kid makes it. Yeah, you have the knucklehead who shoots it from far, but most just walk up and set it in there. So you've got to make sure that your goals within your program, that your assistant coaches know what they are. That is so crucial. They've got to know what they are, and they've got to be attainable for them, okay? So same thing you do in a classroom. I know we're all coaches and teachers. Same thing. Make sure your goals are known and they are attainable. So that's just kind of a big thing. Open communication about those aspirations in your program. It's got to happen if it's not already in your program. All right. And then here's my last step on these things that must happen to build this ideal environment. You've got to support their role. I kind of mentioned it earlier. You're going to have some coaches that come in and maybe they're a first-year teacher. Maybe they're a first-year coach. Maybe they're not. But regardless of what their experience is, you have got to support them in your role. Okay, you've got to help them fulfill the roles and responsibilities that you give them. You might put them in charge of tutorial logs and grades for the first time they've ever done it. Okay, well, support them in that. Let them know what your standards are. Make that clear to them and show them what it looks like, what you expect out of them. And then make sure that you're there to give them advice, any assistance in completing those tasks, and that or further education on a topic. If they have a question or they don't understand something, find some way to help them understand, whether that's telling them to go watch a certain webinar, giving them a YouTube resource, or maybe an article to read, or just giving them advice. Help them along the way. If you support them in their role, they will be so much more successful. So if that's not something you're consciously focusing on, then change that. Start focusing on helping them in the roles that you give them. The other thing is, or the last thing I have is inspire education. You want your assistant coaches to know that you care about their development. You don't just care about how they look in this year. You want to know, you want to talk about where they're going to be in 10 years, where they're going to be in 20 years, what their aspirations are, because you want them to know that you care about their development. I was lucky enough that I've been in the soccer community since I started playing club ball back in 6th grade. So I know a lot of the licenses, the clinics and stuff like that. But for someone who didn't play as much growing up, or maybe didn't play at all growing up, they don't know what those opportunities look like. So you've got to teach them what the licenses are. You've got to tell them what are good clinics to attend, what are good conferences. You've got to help them along that way to guide them in that education. And the other thing, if you are going to some type of clinic or course, invite them with you. Don't just take yourself, okay? Make sure that you're using those opportunities to grow as a staff, not just for yourself, as a staff. You want to focus on that whole development, just like your players. You're not going to just focus on 5 kids. No, you're going to focus on the development of your program, because you realize that you're only as strong as your weakest JV player. I mean, that's the reality of a program. So just know that they can't grow unless you're giving them those opportunities. And then the last piece I want to harp on is make sure that you are continuing to grow with your soccer and general coaching education. Inspire them by you continuing to do it. So if you're a coach who, I know we've had these conversations in the webinars previously. If you're someone who hasn't done a coaching class in 5 years, 10 years, whatever that looks like, maybe it's just been a couple years, go do something. Go do another course. We've talked about so many different opportunities for that. So go find a course to do and encourage them and bring them along if you can. Really, really big, inspire them to continue to grow. These are all those things I just covered. I feel like those are head coach just absolute musts in order to design and create that ideal environment and that rapport that you absolutely need to be successful. So that's kind of what I have for building that environment. So that's kind of what that looks like. Before I go on, does anyone have any questions? I don't want to I don't know. Give it a minute for questions. I don't know. I think we're good. I can't hear you, Warren.
I was just checking the question answer. I know that there's been a couple of good examples from other people out there too that I've talked over the time. But yeah, feel free to ask your questions in the question and answer section, but that's all I had. Okay,
perfect. That'll work. If you have a question, guys, just throw in that Q&A, and I'll try to make sure I'm keeping up with that over on that side. I also have an opportunity at the very end for all of that. So if you just want to save it towards the end, that's totally fine as well. But all right, I'm going to go ahead and move into section number 2. All right, so focusing on that coaching staff communication. All right, in order to be successful and build that rapport, you've got to have good communication. I absolutely love this quote that I came across. It says, "Communication works for those who work at it." All right, it is not something that you might be good at it. I'm not saying you're not good at it, but you might not be the all-star of all-stars right now at communication. You can always grow in that. Just like your players can always grow, you can always grow in that too. So kind of listen to a couple of these things and see what you can either add on to what you're currently doing or maybe develop further in, as we kind of talk about this communication aspect. All right, so to have effective communication, here are a few things that I truly believe that head coaches must have and must do. So for your assistant coaches to be successful, guys, you've got to clarify all of the roles and the tasks, all right? These need to be shared from the very, very beginning, and they need to be specific, all right? So, and then provide examples. So for example, one of the things that I will not do myself that I will have my assistant coaches do is the tutorial logs I mentioned earlier. And I will be very specific in how those are done. They will always be the Monday before the week that grades are due, and they will be expected to hand them out on that day. So they will either have to do them the week before or over the course of that weekend. Okay, my expectations will always be a 75 and below gets tutorials. Okay, I have an example of the tutorial sheet already for them, and so you have to really, really define what you want them to do and what that looks like for them to be successful. Okay, if I went into the conversation and said, "Hey, Coach Q, all right, you're gonna do all of the tutorial logs this year. Good luck." How are you going to know that they're holding up to those standards that you have and all those things? So you've got to have those conversations, and you've got to define those roles and make sure everything is clear for them. I know that might sound a little over the top, but just in order to make sure that they're holding those standards, make sure that's defined for them. Yes, give them that wiggle room to change things. Maybe alter the way some things are being done, and that's fine. But in general, you've got to clarify those roles and tasks for them to be successful. And it's just got to be communicated from the get-go. Maintain reference materials. This is something that I feel like some coaches are really, really good at, or they're really, really not good at. Maybe there's in between, but I haven't found it yet. But you want to have a place or places for your coaches to find whatever they need, whether that is practice plans, maybe it's calendars, maybe it is contact info, whatever that looks like. Okay, maybe it's those tutorial log examples, whatever that looks like. You want to make sure that you have some place where all of that can be accessed. I know my boyfriend's school, for example, uses a binder. Every single coach at the beginning of the year gets a binder about this thick, and that is like their Bible for the year, and they are expected to carry it around with them, and it has everything in there for them. That's fine. You can also, we're moving towards everything digital. Use a Google folder, use a team drive, something along those lines where everything is housed. You can use those roles and responsibilities in there. Your program goals can be in there. Calendars, contact info, drill examples. Okay, maybe you have that broken down for them into specific categories. Here are some building out of the back examples. Here are some switching the point of attack, getting your outside backs involved, whatever that looks like, specific drills that they can use. Practice plans. Maybe at the beginning of every week, you put those practice plans in there for the upcoming week. Or maybe it's just every day you're adding that to some place where they can all access it. You're not limited to what you can share with them, and don't think that you are. Please make sure that you are giving them every opportunity that you possibly can, and that all of those reference materials are in one place and housed in just one place for them to access, because that communication goes such a long way, having that organized for them and everything else. So make sure that you're maintaining those reference materials for them. Another thing, I know I've talked about it before, be willing to have those challenging conversations, whether it's allowing someone to kind of challenge an idea. Maybe it's encouraging them to challenge an idea. Maybe it's saying, hey, I'm going into this game and I'm thinking about having a 3-back. What are your thoughts? Tell me. Okay, well, here's what I think. No, tell me, what would your opinion be of this? And constantly, encouraging their feedback, encouraging their suggestions. Ask them for recommendations often. They will appreciate it, 1, and 2, they would love to do that. They want to help you. They're here for a purpose. So make sure that you're encouraging all of those moments. And like I mentioned before, you've got to create those moments. So make sure for that good communication to build that rapport that you are having these good conversations. And then my last slide on communication, be transparent. Make sure that nothing you're doing is surprising them. I've had instances in the past where we decided on something and then the follow through was different. And then that came back around to me and it was a what in the world just happened situation. So make sure that when a decision is made, that you're telling your assistant coaches what that decision is, and that you're telling them why you made that decision. They will appreciate it. They might not agree with your decision, but as long as they understand it and you have a purpose behind it, they're more than likely going to support you on it, especially if you've already built that rapport and that loyalty and that trust with them. So make sure that you are being as transparent as possible with those coaches, whether that's using a group chat on your phone, whatever that looks like, constant communication, but be transparent as possible with your assistant coaches. It will work for you, not against you. Middle thing, it says meet often with their assistant coaches. I mentioned it before, create those opportunities. Okay, if you never meet, you can't build that rapport and you won't be successful. You won't build that rapport that we talked about at the beginning. So you've got to create those opportunities. It's an absolute must. Collaborate with their assistant coaches. It goes back to that reflecting thing that I talked about earlier. After you've done that reflection, can you collaborate with them now? They want to contribute to your program. And so once again, create those opportunities to debate, to talk about reasoning and make program decisions as one. You will be more successful if you have every coach understanding why they're doing it and backing you in that. So collaborate with them, include them in that conversation. And I know that's kind of a common theme in this. Reflect with them, have them in those conversations. But in order to build that rapport and truly be successful, you've got to collaborate with them and include them in those conversations. So I think that is it for communication. Doesn't look like we have. No, I don't have any questions. So I'm going to go ahead and keep moving on. I'm halfway done now. This is my halfway point. Most of the stuff at the beginning was a lot longer. Now it slows down a little bit. But here we go. Idea 3. So it says defining and deciding on staff roles and responsibilities. So this is what I talked about, that I kind of took a lot of the idea from what Dean Austin talked about in that webinar I watched. And so it's kind of his process that he talked about. I changed up kind of the way it was said, but it's kind of his process on deciding who gets what roles and what those roles are. So the quote for this one is, delegating work works, provided the one delegating works too. I chose this because it's been an issue in the past with me, with a head coach that I had, where I was receiving the work and I wasn't always sure what in the world that person was doing. So make sure that you are absolutely a part of that, and that you are showing your assistant coaches that you are just as dedicated and you are working just as hard as any role and responsibility that you give them. I feel like that is huge. So absolutely great quote. I agree with Chuck over there. I love this quote. So it was a no-brainer for me to add that on here. So all right, so like I said, I kind of pulled a lot of this from that Dean Austin webinar that I have. There are 6 steps total, so you'll see 3 on this page and you'll see 3 on the next page. So kind of defining those roles. So step 1, based on the needs and goals of your program each year, yes, these need to change, the head coach must decide what roles and responsibilities are necessary to have, okay? From year to year, you may add on some things, you may delete some things, and that change is perfectly fine. But you have to know going into every single year what responsibilities there are going to be and what roles are going to need to be fulfilled. And those can be a plethora of different things. And I'll give an example. So let's say if I'm moving into my 2nd year in the program, and this past year I had a 3.6 overall team GPA. Okay, well, I'm probably not going to stress as much on the tutorial logs. Okay, maybe that was successful. Maybe I keep it going. But if I realized throughout the process that my athletes were able to manage that themselves, and I realized that's, giving them a lot of trust and leadway, but maybe that's something that I pull off, or maybe make or change the expectations in that. Whereas if my team had a 2.5 GPA, maybe if that was an assistant coach role before, maybe I take over that as a head coach to make sure that it is like I'm constantly bringing it up and constantly more in charge of that struggle that we had in the program. And so just know that you can add things and take things out as needed, and that's totally fine. But step number 1, you have to decide what those things are. So whatever that looks like for your program, you've got to decide on what those are. So step 2, the head coach must evaluate his or her strengths and weaknesses. So for example, I am very good at athlete and parent communication. That is something that I will always hold on to for one of my roles and responsibilities. I'm very on top of communication, whether that's social media, keeping up with their mind messages, email, whatever that looks like. That is something that that is for sure a strength of mine. Whereas weaknesses, for example, I'm very good at keeping track of equipment. But for me, there's nothing more stressful than handing out equipment. I can keep track of it. I can tell you what size is what jersey I have and what. But the transition of actually giving it out, I want hands off on that. I want someone who is willing to have their hands in on that moment where stuff's just going all over the place. So that is something that I would pass off. So you have to look at yourself and decide, what are things that I'm good at? What are things that I'm not good at? Okay. And when you have those strengths, embrace those strengths, take on those aspects. Those weaknesses, find someone in your program who can do it better than you. That's okay. It's okay to have those weaknesses. Find that other person to do that. And then the last part of that is you've got to really, and this is something that Dean Austin really, really talked about. He basically said that a struggle throughout his whole entire career has been having that appropriate and healthy workload. He talked about, basically getting to the office at 5:30 in the morning and leaving at 7 or 8 every night, and that he'd work over the weekends, and how throughout his coaching, I believe he's at 57 years now, throughout his coaching career, he had to change that as it went on. So that's something that you need to look at every year. What is an appropriate and healthy workload for you? Okay. So you have to, and compare from years before. Was the last year not enough? Was the last year too much? And decide on that and kind of make that step 3 decision based on that. So step 3, it talks about the head coach will take on some of those roles that were decided on in step 1. So like I talked about, I will always hold on to communication because I know it's something that I can handle and it's not too much for me. But then from there, you add on those extra roles and responsibilities. So that step 3 is really deciding, what are the tasks that I want to take on or can take on based on my strengths? And 2, am I really keeping to the stuff that I decided for myself in step 2? So is it my strength, and is it within that healthy workload? So those are kind of steps 1 through 3, focusing on the head coach. The second slide is kind of more about the assistant coach role. So step 4, this is huge, guys. The head coach must ask, okay, if it's a new coach, you're probably going to have to ask, or maybe you've worked with someone for a while and you've figured out what those strengths and weaknesses of them are, and that's totally fine. But step 4, you've got to figure out what their strengths and weaknesses are, okay? You might have somebody who is phenomenal on the field, can, create practice plans on the fly, but can't organize them. Okay, so maybe you have that person creating the stuff that hands it off to that next person because the other person is really, really good at organizing stuff, and maybe that's in your binder or your shared folder, whatever that looks like. But use their strengths and weaknesses to help you in your program, but first you've got to figure out what those are. Step 5, you must decide on an appropriate workload for your assistant coaches. This is huge because, once again, I already mentioned that some of my assistant coaches will not have multiple sports. That's awesome. But in your programs, you might have every single coach that has multiple sports. So you've really got to decide what a workload for them can be, especially if they have other positions held at the school. In my years of teaching, I've had other responsibilities at the school. Last year, for example, I was in charge of all 42 freshman teachers. I was the freshman team lead. So that was a huge other role that I had on top of coaching and everything else. So you really have to look at them as a whole individual, whether coaching, teaching, families, whatever that looks like, and decide what an appropriate workload for them. It's going to look different for different coaches. And as long as it's explained and you have that good rapport, people won't be upset if Johnny has 4 tasks and roles that they have to complete and Billy has 5, okay? As long as it's explained and communicated and you have that reasoning behind it, people won't care, but you have to evaluate that. The last step is kind of taking that step 4 and step 5 and delegating those roles that you did not take off from the roles you decide on in step 1. Okay, create those roles for them, written out specifically, and then share those with them. And that's kind of the next thing that I will show you guys in this part 4. But you've got to make sure that you delegate those roles specifically to coaches and have that created for what that looks like for them. So just kind of a few steps of how to transition with that. I truly think you should start with yourself and kind of move on from there, but you might feel differently about that. You might think, hey, I need to look at my assistant coaches first and then take on the other roles and responsibilities. That's fine. Whatever that looks like in your program, like I said, this is just what he talked about that day, and so this is kind of what I based it on. So it'll look different in your program, and that's totally fine. No questions? All right, good. All right, here's my last piece that I have to go through. So this is the part for me that this is what I mentioned is very unfinished for me. I am sharing it with you guys knowing that it is not done. So just kind of just know that when we're looking at it. So this is about creating and sharing your monthly plan, kind of what your year looks like. I've broken mine down into a monthly plan, and you'll see why on this next slide. The quote for this one is, "By failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail," which is another quote I absolutely love. You've got to make sure that you are preparing for success. And I mean, that's the bottom line. So having something like I'm about to show you guys, and you might already have it, which is awesome. But if not, think about it, create one, work on this. All right. And then, okay, perfect. It's not this slide. All right, so here, and I put this up because I don't want to take credit for what I've done. Yes, I've added it. I've made it soccer-like, but I don't want to take credit for where I got the idea from. So this was in a THSCA magazine from March. I don't know if you guys hoard them. I hoard them until I actually read them, and you can see I do actually read them. So this was an article from John Settle. He's a head coach. And he basically has broken down, and this is all focused on culture for him, which I think is really, really awesome. And if you're able to read it, you can kind of see some of that on the side. But he has broken down every single month of the year. He has it in head coach responsibilities, assistant coach responsibilities, players, program, and what that looks like. As you can see, I really used it. I butchered it. I tried to make it fit the soccer season. So this is the example I went off of. You can see there are some things I didn't use, but a lot of it I did. There are other things that I also have a question about. If you look under August, I didn't know what a Win Club breakfast was, but I was interested in it. And so I have it written down as a question to eventually email him. The Mom's Football Clinic, what is that? And so all these different culture building ideas that he used and implements, and also kind of these roles and responsibilities. So I absolutely loved this example, and this is where I started at, just so you guys know. I want to give him credit because, man, give him credit where credit is due. So here's just kind of example, and I'll go ahead if it'll let me. Nope. Let's see if I can copy. Oops. It's not copy link address. Let's see if I can get that. Okay. Hopefully you guys can see that. It says it went to all panelists and attendees. Okay, it does. Okay, cool. So you can kind of pull that up. The one I just shared in the chat is the one that includes all of the months. And it also includes, I forget what's at the bottom. Sorry, I don't have it actually printed. It also includes like a throughout the year. And at the very, very bottom, I believe, it has the, I think it's all the paperwork I used for, or will use for the, like, I guess, preseason meeting or whatever it looks like. And so just so you know, when you open up that document, that's kind of what that'll look like. I just took 3 months to kind of show you guys. So monthly plan broken down. Once again, I stole a lot of it from that football coach's example, but some of this I've also kind of changed, tailored to be soccer specific and to kind of look like what I want my program to be. So just as a couple of things. So head coach, I've put my responsibilities already in there. Yes, these will change once I actually meet my assistant coaches. I'm still in the process of hiring 2, so I don't necessarily know what their strengths and weaknesses will be. So I may change what these roles and responsibilities are, but right now this is kind of my plan without knowing who they are. And so you can see I have it broken down into head coaches. I have my assistant coaches' responsibilities. My leadership council will also have responsibilities. And in this month, it's just one thing. In other months, it might be 3 or 4 things. The players, okay, we're focusing on off-season. We're in that first round of off-season testing. And so this is something that's completely laid out, what my players are going to be doing. Program, when I mention program, that's as a whole. That's including basically anyone. It could be talking about alumni events. It could be talking about parent events. It could be talking about the little kids programs that I hope to have and stuff like that. So program is, just think of it as like a super general thing when you kind of look through this. But you can see I have stuff completely detailed out. And a lot of it is culture things as well. One thing you might find under the head coach roles for August, it says schedule support team dates. Okay, well, you might be like, what is that? I'm going to make sure that every single one of, and it's optional, but I'm going to try to encourage all of my players to go support a team tennis match. I want them to go out on a Saturday morning and go support cross country, a volleyball match, a football game all together. So that's kind of that culture aspect. And one thing that has been awesome for me building this over the last month or so, like I said, not done, but as I've been building it, I've really had to evaluate what I want my culture to look like. What things do I want each month? When do I incorporate those and stuff? And so by doing this, you kind of get to find those different responsibilities. Okay, so Mark asks, can you talk more about the leadership council and who is involved? Is it players and coaches? So that is something that I'm currently working on building right now. Warren kind of gave me an idea on this one. So I'm actually, good coaches still everything. If you haven't learned that yet, good coaches literally still everything. So I stole this monthly plan. I stole the other idea from Warren. Just know that it's a real thing. So as far as that answer, Mark, for me, what I'm going to start doing this summer, once again, I am moving into a role as a new head coach and also to a new school. one thing I'm doing right now is in my initial team meetings, I had my first one yesterday. In my initial team meetings, I'm having all of my kids define what character looks like. And so what we did yesterday is, for attendance purposes, they put their name. And then second, in the chat, they were all required to put 1 to 2 characteristics they believe that a leader has. And so in the chat, it started populating, supports the team, good communication skills, and all these things started to populate. And then from there, what I asked them to do, not in the chat, this was on a Google form, of course, that way they didn't see everyone's responses. Then from there, what they did on the Google form is they were told they had to submit one person that they believed is a leader within the program. I didn't care if they were a sophomore, junior, or senior next year, and I didn't care if they were JV or varsity. That to me does not matter. A leader is going to be anywhere in your program. And so they submitted those names, and what I will do going forward is, once I have all my player meetings, because I haven't had all those yet, I will take those names and compile. It'll probably look like anywhere from 6 to 10 players on the leadership council, and we'll start having those discussions throughout this summer. Obviously, all that will be virtually. Going forward, I would love to drive up to the school and bring them donuts and have those good conversations. But that is what it'll look like for me this summer. That leadership council, if you look at my list, that will continue throughout the year. And eventually, I will give kids the opportunity to basically apply to be in that leadership council. I believe that's like September. I wish I would have printed it, but I don't actually have it printed, so I can't look at the whole thing right now. But I believe that's in like September or October, where kids can actually apply to that leadership council and they can be invited into that. The leadership council will have book studies over the summer and all kinds of stuff. So if you kind of look through my monthly plan, you can kind of see what all they have. So that's just kind of how that's set up. Great question there. I really appreciate that. But I'm still developing that though as well. So leadership council may change. Who knows? Then kind of moving on to next month, you can see in March, it gets a lot more hectic. That's where you start, you're in season, you're focusing on that end of season. So you kind of have a lot of different responsibilities. And that's also, hopefully not every program, and it's not going to be every program, some continue on, but for a lot of coaches, that's when their season's in, and they have to do that evaluation with their assistant coaches and kind of have those good conversations. So I already have some of that built in to the document I shared with you guys. And so you can kind of see, like, I've planned when we're going to evaluate, when we're going to have those discussions, when you create your 3 and 5 year plan. Or I think it's 2 and 5. But all that stuff is planned into here. You can just look through it. I really don't want to make it about this, but you're more than welcome to look through that. Email me if you have questions. I'm more than willing to answer those questions for you guys. But please use it as a resource. I really hope that it'll help you out. May, I have, like I said, broke it down into every single month. You can see Leadership Council, for example, has a lot more roles in this month. They're going to be mailing out the Mother's Day cards. They're going to be having a session with all the players where they're writing Father's Day cards to send out, that I'll send out in mid-June. And then they're also, one reason I included May was that every other month, I'll also have a team volunteer event or a team social outing. And so that is something that's also planned into it. And that's communicated to the players and the assistant coaches. And so by having this document, you really lay everything out, not only for your assistant coaches, but also for your players and stuff. And what I would share with my players might not be this exact same document, but it might just be that far right column. But they'll at least know, and they'll be communicated with what their roles and expectations were. So I really, really, really encourage you guys to complete a plan for yourself. Take the time to write it. Whether you're copy and pasting a bunch of the stuff that I had, because once again, I took it from that other football coach, that's fine. But create your plan. Break it down. Maybe your leadership council looks different. Maybe you just do it with captains. Whatever that looks like for you, tailor this document to your program, but write it and share it with your coaching staff. It will just really help that communication there. The last thing I want to end with is the Dean Austin quote that I was absolutely loved during his presentation. It was kind of an ending point for him in that presentation. It said, "Don't lead by authority, lead by influence." It goes back to leading by example that I talked about previously and everything else. Your assistant coaches want to work for you. They want to be successful in your program. They didn't come there to not be. So work with them, not against them. Do anything that you possibly can to help them out. All right. So absolutely loved that. But yeah, so that's the end. So thank you guys for listening to everything I had to say. That actually lasted longer than I expected to, so that's a good thing. If you want to follow me on Twitter, there's my Twitter handle, and then you can also email me. I just got my Azle email address, so I didn't actually put it on here, but that you can also reach out to me on that. So yeah, I got 2 questions that I see. Thanks for sharing. I also give my boosters a monthly calendar for them. So he said he also gives his boosters a monthly calendar for them. That's something that you could definitely add. I mean, that's a great idea there. So super awesome with that. And then it also says, will you allow edit privileges on these forms? I don't know. I thought I did, but maybe not. I don't know. I'll have to check. Maybe I can change that, but thought it was. Or I don't know. Is it even copy and pastable? I don't know how that works. I don't know. I'm not really good with Google, guys. I'm really like learning it. So
They can go to file. If they go to the top and go to file and then drop down, it'll say make a copy and then allow them to copy, and then they can edit any way they want to on that.
Okay. So
whenever you're going to put, it's already put up in the side chat, and then I'll put the link in later today as well.
Oh, okay. So I don't need to do it right now?
Then I wouldn't do it, because if you do it where they edit it, they'll edit yours. So let them go in.
Okay.
So
okay. Yeah, I don't want to do that. Yeah, I don't want them to. Yeah. No. Okay. All right. Yeah, we'll share that with you guys. Okay, that'll work. but yeah, that's all. That's it. So that's what I got.
And then I know we had that one question on Leadership Council, and that, I'll tell you what, just as a lead-in, at some point I want to bring in guys to show, but that's made the most difference as far as coaching in my career, that Leadership Council idea. And so that's something we'll opt into the future if y'all don't mind. But that being said, hey, thank you very much. That was awesome, man. You did awesome as usual. So I expected no less, and we got it. But is there anybody got questions? And can we go and open it up to everybody? Maybe we can go back in now to the open question area.
One sec.
That's what's going to happen is
I need to stop sharing.
Put it back into the Zoom.
Yeah.
Okay. There you go. I stopped sharing. Hopefully that.
Hey, and then one thing while everybody's coming back in, one thing that stood out to me, and just listen to this. What do you think the biggest difference between, I know you brought up 2 coaches, but those that listen and that don't listen? I mean, what were some of the things that stood out to you between those 2?
I feel like for me, like the biggest thing was like, if a coach listened to what I had to say as an assistant coach, I felt valued and was so much more willing to support them in any decision and back them up and work for them and do that extra. And it's truly where you feel like that value, just by being listened to, whether they take your idea or not. It's just that sense of being valued. And so that was something that was huge for me. In the program where my opinion didn't matter as much, I was constantly frustrated because I wasn't being communicated with as to why decisions were being made, and sometimes I wasn't even communicated with as to what the decisions were made. So I think for me, it's that value, and it's kind of creating that rapport. And man, I mean, if you create that, assistant coaches want to work for you, but if you don't, it kind of makes it a miserable experience for everyone. So, I mean, that's just, I don't know, that was kind of my experiences with it. So hopefully that answers your question.
To piggyback on that,
okay, go ahead.
The common business practice is to give a sense of ownership within the program. And if you empower your assistant coaches to have that sense of ownership, it kind of takes over everything, right? So what we do is, over the course of the first fall semester, is we have an online document that we're constantly organizing our thoughts together. And I give my assistant coaches just as much say in the creation of our teams, so that when they're going to coach their JV1 or JV2 side, they feel like they had firm ownership in the creation of that roster. So they show up and train these guys that much harder, because it's not just me giving them a list of names that they're coming up and, all right, time to learn names on the first day of training, and then everything kind of falls apart from there. Because on that side of it too, it's respect. Those kids have a coach that knows their name on day one, that knows who they have, they're excited about it, versus a guy that's out there, trying to figure out names on day one. And it's worked out pretty well over the whole concept of them creating their team with my guidance, of course, than me just giving them a name on a piece of paper.
I like it. I'm going to jump off that too, but I want you to notice, and this comes something that will stand out to me, and this is old man mistakes, right? So for the years I've done it, I wonder how many times that when people have problems with their assistant coaches is an ego issue, where you're afraid or insecure so that you're not going to listen to somebody that may disagree with you. And so sometimes when you hear people are having problems with their assistants, you wonder how many times it's been that person is not willing to sit back and listen to somebody else. I think that when you look at the ego, if you can put that aside, 90% of your people want to do good jobs. Everybody wants to do a good job. And if you're unwilling to listen to them, why is that person there? I think I heard a great quote over in Jocko podcast I was hearing. It was talking about George Marshall and Omar Bradley. And George Marshall, after a week of battle plans when going to World War II, looked at his generals and said, "Hey, you guys are awful. This is the worst group of people I ever said." And they said, "Well, why is that?" He said, "Not a single one of you guys that disagree with any part of my plan. And if you're not going to willing to disagree with the plan, then I don't know if it's right or not." Mm-hmm. And so that willingness to listen to somebody else to take in their advice and their thoughts and then make your plan better, I think is the big difference in kind of what I got in overall reaching from your deal today.
Yeah.
With that being said, is there anybody else has any questions? So right now everybody's on mute, but you can jump in at any time and ask any questions. And it's pretty much the question and answer area is you can use that if you want, or if you want to unmute yourself and ask. I know Maddie's awesome at it and she's willing to answer anything. And so, like I said, did good today.
Thank you.
Hey, this is Freddie Ortega over there with Coddle of Colleyville. It was interesting to hear all those things, and I thought it was really good. I think sometimes some of y'all forget, you're talking a lot about involvement for assistant coaches. Don't forget, some coaches just kind of want to be there. They want to enjoy, I don't go to varsity practices, but you know what? I enjoy kind of going to varsity games, but you got to remember, some coaches maybe don't want to give an opinion. As a football coach, everyone has an answer for the next play or what you should have done, but sometimes you got to remember, you're trying to get coaches involved. Maybe they don't want to be involved. I like being there, standing next to Coddle, trying to be his get-back coach. That's
an unfortunate job for anybody.
Yeah.
Sometimes that is a bad role, especially when you have to work for me. Sorry, Freddie.
It's not a bad role when you're bigger than him, so it's not too bad. But I bring that up, kind of remembering maybe you should ask a coach, how much do you want to be involved or not involved? That's an important question. And not to be mean to Coddle, in football, he's not very involved, not because of a bad way, because he has soccer, but I have football. Sometimes I'm more worried about football, not because I love soccer. When January gets here, I love it, but those kind of things you got to keep in mind when you're talking about assigning jobs. I know you brought up what's their second sport, but it's not everyone wants to be as involved as you're speaking. Don't get me wrong, I love going to all the games, but once again, don't ask me X's and O's. I'll stand there and giggle with you and hold your back, but that's about it.
Yeah, that's a great point for sure.
Thanks, Freddie. No, that was awesome. All right. Well, with that being said, I want to thank you very much for taking your time on this Saturday morning to join us. We'll have the next week is going to be Shell Simon. We're really looking forward to it. One thing just to let you know, it's going to be a different link because according to his university and their compliance officer, he must host it. So it's not an NCAA violation. So we'll be sending out that link later on this week as soon as we get it. And looking forward to seeing that. And he's going to be covering the recruiting process from a college coach perspective. And so it should be really, really interesting. Also, I want to take a moment to thank Maddie for taking the time to go over this. I know she put a lot of effort into it. As you can see, the PowerPoints were awesome, and I thought you did a fantastic job. And I know I learned a lot today. But
yeah.
I want to say from all of us, thank you very much, and thank you for your time doing it. Yeah, like I said, you did exactly like I expected, which was incredible. So with that being said, thank you guys very much for being here. And once again, appreciate it, and see you next week.